Hi guys, so this is going to be the first of hopefully a series of videos that are going to be able to show you some software skills, primarily around Lightroom and Photoshop. So hopefully they're going to be nice little bite-sized videos that won't take up too much of your time, but will be really useful in showing you some of the key skills you'll need to use these pieces of software. Some of it you're going to already know, but hopefully I'm going to show you some stuff that will be really useful. So for the first one, we're going to be going over local adjustments. So really big distinction within all editing is global adjustments and local adjustments. So we're either going to be editing the entire image, which would be a global adjustment. Now in Lightroom, what you're looking at the moment, that would be anything under this basic panel. Now I can zoom into this hopefully to show you. So anything under the basic panel over here and so forth down this list. So the HSL tab, the detail tab, all of those will be global adjustments. But right up at the top here, you will see your adjustment brush, your radial filter, your graduated filter, red eye reduction or correction, spot removal and crop. So what we're going to look at today is the radial filter and the graduated filter. I'm planning on making an independent video just for the adjustment brush. So right now we're going to look at the radial filter. This is a really versatile tool. Let me just zoom out of that in a second. So what we can do, once we're in our radial filter, we have a new dialog box come up, which will, any adjustments you make here will only affect the local area that we're going to try and edit. So what we can do, we have a little crosshair as our mouse. We can click and drag with the mouse, and we can make a circle or an oval or any kind of ellipse that you need to make to cover the area you want to edit. Then you can change the size of this whenever you want. But I'm just going to make it roughly the shape of her face. And you can see by default, most of the screen has now gone red. Now that red is only an overlay, so that red is showing us where the effect will take place. So at the moment, it's affecting the entire outside. So not the inside, not on her face, it's going to affect everything outside over here. What I'm trying to do at the moment with this image is I'm trying to brighten up her eyes a little bit. So it's a little bit shadowy on her face and on her hair. So I'm going to try and make that a little bit better and bring up the levels there. So to do that, I need to press over here. We have a little button that says invert. That's going to swap it over from being outside to inside. There we go. So the red has switched from the outside to the inside. And the little anchor points on the top, the bottom, the left and the right, we can drag these in or out whenever we want to adjust the size of this. Now before we get started with the editing, we also need to adjust one more thing, and that is over on the right hand side again, it's the feather. So at the moment by default it says 50%. Which gives us a nice graduate effect. If I bring that down to 0, you'll see that we get a really hard line, which will make the effect that we're going to do really noticeable. So 50% is a good starting point, but you might want to increase it. You might want to make it the effect more gradual. You can see that happening there. So for my situation at the moment, 100% is probably better, but I'm going to bring it back to about 80. What I'm then going to do is press O on the keyboard, which will toggle off the overlay. Now we put our attention over to the right hand side. Now the highlighted box, whatever changes you make here, will only affect the inside of that area. And you can see that by what I'm doing there with the exposure. Now a little handy tip, whenever you change any of these values, you can always reset them straight back to 0 really easily by just double clicking on the actual word. So I'm going to double click on exposure and it will reset back to 0. So it saves you having to fiddle around getting that exactly back to 0 like that. Just double click on the word and it will reset straight back to 0. Nice and easy like that. So what I want to do here is simply bring up the shadows. So I'm going to raise those shadows and you can see under her eyes have got much brighter. And that's all I wanted to do with this one, but you could use the radial filter for anything you wanted. It doesn't just have to be for that one specific thing. It could be for a multitude of different things. Another example of that, if I add a new radial, I'm going to put it over the flowers. So I'm doing it in the same way, but making it a bit bigger and making sure again that it's inverted so that it's affecting just the middle. And we can see that by turning the overlay on by pressing O. Now that is the case for any local adjustment that you make in Lightroom. O on the keyboard will toggle that on and off. You can also see down here, show selected mask overlay. And I'll zoom into that so you can see. Show selected mask overlay. Down at the bottom there, we'll do the same thing. Tick on or off will help you make that distinction much more easily. But if you prefer using a keyboard shortcut like me, then it will be O as a toggle. Nice and easy. So now that I've got that selected and I'm happy that that area in the middle is being affected, now I can tweak the settings just on the flowers there. I might give them a little bit of clarity to boost the mid-tone contrast and make them stand out a little bit more. Now this is just for demonstration purposes, but you guys could do whatever you wanted with that radial filter. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for someone's face. It could be for any area of an image whatsoever. So you might be asking, well, why do you have different tools? You still have the adjustment brush and the graduated filter to use. Now they have different circumstances where they would be more useful. I could have used the adjustment brush instead of the radial filter there. But there's a very specific use case where you might want to use the graduated filter. And we'll go on to that in just a second. But just to reiterate the radial filter one more time, if we go back into there just by clicking on that tool one more time, you can see those two control points come up there and there. When we click on those, we can go back into that and go back and change anything we might want to tweak. If you want to get rid of one and delete it completely, you can just press backspace or delete on your keyboard. Another handy tip, you can right click on them and you can duplicate. So a good example of where you might use that in a real world situation would be if you are editing someone's face and you had a person next to them, you could right click, duplicate, and then you could drag that extra one over onto the other person's face, like that. So it saves you having to do all that editing twice. I'm just going to delete that by pressing backspace on the keyboard. So now we're going to look at the graduated filter right next to the radial filter at the top there. Shortcut for that on the keyboard is M. And again, it brings up a crosshair exactly the same as it does with the radial filter, but this time instead of creating a circle, when we drag down, it creates a linear effect. And you can see that if I press O on the keyboard, like before, to open the overlay, we're bringing that effect down into the image, and that will come in whichever way you drag it. So let me show you that again from the opposite direction. If I drag from the bottom up, it will come in from there. Or if I drag in from the right-hand side into the image, it will come in from that side. So whichever side you drag in from will start the effect. Now for this demonstration, what I want to show you is how we can affect or edit just the sky of the image. So I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard, and that's going to allow me to keep that effect 100% straight without having to worry about trying to get it perfect. And then remember I said earlier about making a feather. You can see if I drag this line here out or in, it makes the feather less or more. Now what I want to do with this image is I want that feather to be right on the horizon line, so that the effect that we do, or the editing that we do, is only visible in the sky and isn't encroaching onto the water of the sea. So it might take a little bit of tweaking getting that feather correct. We don't want it too much, because then what's going to happen is it's going to start encroaching onto the water there, as you can see. So I'm going to bring that middle line right down onto the water, onto the horizon line, and then I'm going to bring it back until I'm almost happy. Now this can be tweaked at any point. Probably the best way of doing it would be to turn the overlay off and then start actually editing and seeing if it blends or if it doesn't blend. Now we can see by turning that overlay on again, I'm only affecting the sky, which is what I wanted. So now the reason I chose this image was because the initial shot here, the sky was quite bright. And if you look at right in the middle here, if I zoom in, you can see we've got an area, quite a large area, where it's mostly white without much detail whatsoever. So the goal here is to bring the exposure of the sky down whilst not affecting the foreground of the image. So if I bring the exposure down, you can see we've retained lots and lots of detail in that area of the image. Now that's mainly because this image was taken in a RAW format. If you were editing this as a JPEG image, you might not have as much room to adjust the levels there. Now we can do the opposite by bringing another graduated filter from the bottom up. Again, by holding shift, we keep it absolutely straight. Bringing that up to meet the other one, we now have a separate control point that will only affect the foreground of the image. So we can independently now edit the foreground and the sky separate from each other, which gives us a much greater control over how we want the image to look. So I can make this a little bit brighter, I can give it some more contrast, a little bit more clarity to bring out the rocks in the foreground or the pebbles. And then when I'm happy, I can click done down in the bottom there to see what I got. Now I've not done a huge amount to that image, I've just added 2 graduated filters. Now down at the bottom here, we can press the little YY symbol, which will give us a before and after. And you can see I've got a big change just from doing those 2 things. And I've evened out the exposure from the bright sky compared to the foreground. And that's it for this video, guys.